In an ideal world, a game that was good would be recognized as such by everyone, and that would be reflected in its commercial performance, which might even warrant a sequel. Sadly, that's not always the case. Sure, more often than not, games get recognized for their qualities, but there are more than a few examples, even of such games that failed to sell as much as they should have, and as such, faded into obscurity, never to be heard of again. Here, we'll be talking about a few such underappreciated games that we really, really want to see sequels to. The Order 1886. There's no denying that the Order 1886 didn't exactly do justice to its premise, but at the same time, this is the sort of premise that could really have come into its own if it had been given the chance to build on its foundation and learn from its mistakes. The 2015 title looked gorgeous and transported players to a vividly imaginative setting, and we would have loved to see that idea being expanded and built upon in a sequel that worked to address its predecessor's issues. Sunset Overdrive. Insomniac is on top of the world right now, thanks to the incredible success of its Spider-Man games, but not all games by the studio have been so lucky. Sunset Overdrive is easily one of the best, most enjoyable games the developer has made to date, and yet that wasn't reflected in how the game performed on a commercial front. With Ratchet & Clank, Spider-Man and soon Wolverine taking up all of Insomniac's attention, there's no telling when or if Sunset will return. But Sony does own that property now, so hopefully they'll look to go back to it eventually. Resistance 3. Before moving on to Sunset City with the Xbox One, Insomniac spent the PS3 era crafting and completing its trilogy of sci-fi first-person shooters with the Resistance games, and while they never managed to break through to the masses on the same level as so many other shooter franchises did during those years, those who did buy into the series will tell you that it was really quite special. Resistance 3 was similarly solid, delivering an excellent campaign, which was even better when played in co-op, on top of a suite of multiplayer offerings. At this point, it doesn't look like the Resistance series has much of a future. We'd love to be proven wrong on that front though, because it's a series that we feel still has a lot to offer. Enslaved: Odyssey to the West. Ninja Theory has made more than a few games over the years that have been received well by players, but have been let down by their sales. Enslaved: Odyssey to the West is one such title, and perhaps also the one that people still look back on fondly the most. The action-adventure title delivered an excellent story, driven by engaging protagonists in a tight, memorable single-player experience. And no, it didn't set the world on fire or anything, but it was more than good enough to get us invested in its offerings. Invested enough that the fact that it's never going to receive a sequel still stings a bit. Vanquish. Platinum Games is another developer that has often delivered games whose critical and commercial performances haven't exactly aligned. With Vanquish, the Japanese studio delivered an incredibly slick and stylish third-person shooter with some excellent combat, only for the game to fade into obscurity almost immediately upon launch. That is a real shame, because to this day, we haven't played a lot of shooters with combat as good as Vanquish is, and we would have loved to see more of that in a sequel. Bully. This one was obviously going to be in here. Rockstar has enjoyed incredible commercial success over the years with its Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption games, but not all of its outings have been so lucky. Bully stands as one of the developer's most enjoyable games to this day, bringing an incredible premise to life in excellent fashion, and yet, so many years on from its release, a sequel remains elusive. Reports have suggested that something related to Bully might be in the works though, and we genuinely hope that that's the case, because this is a property with a ton of potential. Jade Empire. BioWare's Jade Empire delivered a very different kind of experience, and it did more than enough with its ideas to attract acclaim from nearly everyone who played it. Sadly, Jade Empire wasn't the most commercially successful game, which means that any plans that the developer may have had for a sequel had to be shelved. With BioWare having more than enough on its plate for now, there's no telling if Jade Empire will ever come back. Brutal Legend. Double Fine Productions is the poster child of studios that develops excellent games that don't sell nearly as much as they should have. Brutal Legend exemplifies that perfectly. Even though the game was not without its issues, its musical experience delivered something incredibly unique and memorable. Of course, Double Fine as a studio likes to experiment with new ideas, and very rarely do we see them making direct sequels, with Psychonauts 2 being a recent rare example. If they do go back to Brutal Legend though, we'll be more than a little excited to see how those ideas are built on in a sequel. Okami. Okami has, over the years, amassed decent sales thanks to its many re-releases. But the fact that the game was considered a commercial flop when it launched will always be a shock to us because of how unbelievably good it was. From its Zelda-inspired gameplay and design to its gorgeous aesthetic, there was a lot to love about Okami, and it's a real shame that to this day it hasn't received the fully fledged sequel that it so desperately deserved. The Evil Within 2. Those who've played The Evil Within 2 will emphatically tell you every chance they get. This is one of the best survival horror games in recent memory. It combines its semi-open world design with its linear sections perfectly, and is equally successful with its combination of psychological horror and action. That, combined with the fact that the story ends on a cliffhanger, means that there is no shortage of people keenly anticipating a sequel. Though, given the poor sales of The Evil Within 2, there's no guarantee that that will happen. With Tango Gameworks now being an Xbox first-party studio though, hopefully they'll get another shot at it. Prey. Bethesda released a surprising number of games in a short period that were received well by critics and audiences, but couldn't sell enough to match that praise. The aforementioned The Evil Within 2 was one of those, and Arcane's Prey reboot was another. The excellent immersive sim is perhaps one of the most criminally overlooked games to date, and while Arcane is still pumping out excellent games, with the promising Redfall being next in line for launch, it doesn't seem like Prey is something they'll go back to in the near future. Syndicate 2012. Reimagining the turn-based tactics Syndicate games as a linear first-person shooter was a risky gamble by EA. And while the 2012 Cyberpunk FPS isn't a generation-defining game or anything like that, there's no denying that it's a solid shooter. Of course, the game's less-than-stellar sales didn't do it any favours, and Syndicate quickly faded back into the background, having barely enjoyed any time in the sun with its revival. Hopefully, that's not going to be permanent, because there were several good ideas in the 2012 reboot that we'd love to see more of in future games. Days Gone. The most recent entry in this list, and also the one that stings more than most, if not all, of the others. Days Gone was not a game without issues, and it might not be as hyper-polished as most first-party PlayStation games tend to be, but those who've invested time into its post-apocalyptic open-world offerings will tell you that beneath its rough edges, Days Gone was a special game. Sony Bend had some really interesting ideas for a sequel that sadly will never see the light of day, though we are still curious to see how they apply those in their new open-world IP. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on GamingBolt, so please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.